Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast today, or our webinar today. I'm here with James from WorkMagic. We're talking through the eight-figure growth engine and really talking about scaling paid media with incrementality. It's been a conversation that we've been having a lot, and one of the things that we get to see pretty often is having conversations with brands that are in that like $5 million range, $10 million range sometimes, and just they've been able to brute force it to kind of where they are right now. And then the next step is really how do you actually scale beyond that? And so I think that this is one of the biggest unlocks and a really important piece of the puzzle. So I'm excited for us to chat about it. Introducing myself, I'm Samir Balwani. I'm the CEO of Query. We're a media buying agency specializing in full funnel media for brands in the D2C space, in retail, pharma, finance, CPG. We get this amazing purview across so many different brands, and I'm excited to come and share kind of what we've learned. And then James here from WorkMagic, he's going to chat. James, quick intro, who you are, what you guys do.
Yeah, my name is James Gerber. I'm the VP of Strategy at WorkMagic, and I've been in the incrementality measurement space helping brands reach their goals for the last 10 or so years. And at WorkMagic, we are really focused on omni-channel marketing and omni-channel sales measurement. And that's where we leverage incrementality, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm really excited for us to kind of think through this all together. So let's actually get started right into things, and then we do have time at the end for Q&A if anyone has any questions. So feel free to just kind of ask as we're going through. There's a little chat feature, and we'll go from there. So what gets you to 5 million? So we've all seen this on the paid media side. You find a winning creative. Everyone's talking about creative volume. Do a ton of creative. Get there, pour budget into that campaign until ROAS breaks, add Google search, and then that's it. And sometimes, and that works. That works really well for a lot of brands. It works really well for commodities. It works really well if you've got a very clear thing that you're trying to solve for. But the problem is that taps out. At some point, you are just taking advantage of category demand, and you are fighting for those people that don't have an answer yet or don't know what the solution is. And so your growth is kind of dependent on the fact that people don't know that there are other solutions out there. And the reality of the situation is the reason why brand and incrementality and everything around demand generation is becoming more and more important is because people have more and more information. They no longer need to go to Google and do research. You can literally ask Claude, you can ask ChatGPT. And so this is where brand demand and brand positioning starts to become more and more important, and building demand around that becomes more and more important. So great, you got here. What's next? What do you do to get beyond that? The reality of it is ROAS is probably lying to you. That's the thing that breaks first. Every platform claims to win. The total number of brands that we talk to and brands that we've supported to early on in their stage, it's, hey, platform attribution, good enough for now. The for now is the key piece of it. You can't let it be good enough forever. And then, so Meta, Google, TikTok, take all your conversion values, add it up. It's more than what's in Shopify, so clearly something is wrong. And that is something we see pretty regularly. In terms of what ends up happening then after that is people go, okay, great. I need to just dedupe everything. So then everyone goes into GA4 and says, okay, last click or data driven is going to be my path forward. And you dedupe everything, but that's just click based. And so now it's branded search looks like a rock star, retargeting looks like a rock star, even though from all of our incrementality tests, we know meta prospecting tends to be the most valuable. So what happens? You cut your meta prospecting campaigns and you run remarketing, and you are just going back to the same people over and over again, and the business never grows, but your ROAS looks great. And then similarly, we talk iOS cookie, all the privacy that we're seeing and the changes there. So now, even going beyond iOS and cookies, but just hard to measure channels, out of home, CTV, direct display, things like that, where you know that they're valuable, but aren't pixeled, aren't sharing data back to you, so you don't know how valuable, and you're just kind of guessing. Or more often than not, what we see is that budget's the first thing that gets cut, even though it might actually be really valuable for you. And so ROAS doesn't actually tell you what you need to know. It just tells you what is doing the very best job at the very bottom of the funnel. And it makes your CFO not bother you, but it doesn't actually build the business. And that's the gap that ends up becoming the issue. So let's talk about full funnel media buying that actually converts. What actually gets you to kind of that next stage? How do you go from 5 million to 9+ figures in revenue? How do you grow your media budgets? And how do you make it actually so that way your media is building your entire business versus your media just looking like a really good channel? There's two different expectations there. And so I went back the wrong way. So when we think about it as the 5 stages of e-com advertising. We almost see every brand that we've worked with go through this process. So the first one is product market fit. You need to know that the brand is actually valuable, that the product is actually something that you want, that customers are willing to give you money. And that's the beginning of the journey. Most brands are starting with testing. The spend is really small. It's really clear. These are the brands that we work with where we go, you know what? If I spend an extra $50K and our revenue jumps, we're not really doing a lot of other things. So I know it's media, right? Like the field of vision and the purview on which the team is managing is clear because there's not so many activities that there isn't a direct line of sight around things. Once you know you've got product market fit, now you're into channel market fit. You've got a handful of channels running, more often than not, Meta, TikTok, Google, and you figured out how to get your basic purchasers. You're scaling pretty well. More often than not, you're running some remarketing, a little bit of prospecting, but really you're still in this early stage of growth where you're just starting to look at ROAS and kind of your payback period. So you might have a CAC to LTV ratio that you're thinking about, and you're really trying to look at this as like holistically from a business perspective. The next step after that is great. Meta is working really well for me, and now I need to scale this. This is where we end up in that I've got 1 million volumes of creative, and I'm just kind of pumping it, and we're really starting to scale, and we're starting to hit diminishing returns. And so maybe you're starting to think about marginal ROAS, and you're really starting to think about, okay, where does my next dollar go? Stage 4 is what a lot of people have started doing recently, which is now they're starting to say channel diversification. Our most common one is CTV. And the number of times CTV is added and then removed and then added and then removed because it's a hard to measure channel. And so a lot of clients will start to look at blended MER, new customer rates, and just have faith in that and hope that some of these channels are working, or just know like, hey, broadly, when we do this, this works well for us. And instinctively, I know we have to invest in marketing, and this is an important channel for us. But getting to that stage 5 is where it becomes really valuable. When you start to think about it as beyond channel diversification into more demand creation and saying, okay, I've invested in CTV and native advertising and sponsorships because that is demand generation for us. And it's more people want the category, more people want us within the category. When they think about the product, they think about us. When they think about the problem, they know we're the solution. And so that's when we're looking at things like brand search lift and MMM and incrementality testing to really kind of scale businesses and really help them understand what the effect of their media is. And what ends up happening is most 8-figure brands start running stage 4 budgets, but with stage 2 thinking. So let's go back to that. They start to think channel diversification, but still thinking about it as channel market fit. And so why does CTV get added and removed back and added and removed back? Is because someone's looking at a channel mix and going, hey, my attributed ROAS and my last click ROAS is this. CTV has the lowest across both. That budget's not actually helping us. So let's pull it and call it a day. And the reality of the situation is that that's not always right. And that there's so much more to it. And having a really cohesive and thoughtful strategy around it is key. And the architecture of the way they think about media is what leads them to make decisions that stop them from scaling their business versus being able to actually think around, okay, this is what's the mix that is helping us, and this is the creative messaging that's actually getting us to the next stage. So let's look at the 2. So stage 4 budget, media spend is starting to seen as investment, multiple channels, your creative team resourcing is scaled up, you've got a measurement framework implemented. Stage 2 thinking, though, is every channel is judged on last click ROAS. Budget is allocated by performance, not the role, not the expectation. Same creative across every placement. The number of times that we'll see someone say, oh, yeah, I made this meta ad. Let's run it in CTV. Or, hey, we made the CTV ad. It's really good. We should absolutely run it in meta, even though that doesn't always make sense. And their measurement framework is really based around whatever the platform reports or just last click data-driven reporting from GA4. There's no complexity and there's no consistency around how they're looking at everything. And to be fair to brands that are kind of thinking about this, and to be fair to you if you're in this stage, there is a lot of people know marketing is important. People know marketing needs to be done. And so you reach the stage because you know it's the right direction. You know it's the right thing to do. But what ends up happening is that your understanding of it stops at you. And your leadership team and your financial partners don't really understand it. And there's a lot of education that needs to be done. And when they see poor numbers or they see bad last click ROAS and you are tried to optimize that, it becomes really difficult to be able to both justify the cost and improve upon it as you scale. So what do? How do you get to the next stage of this? We start to think about it as channels have roles, not budgets. So we think about it in 3 key areas. There's demand creation, demand capture, and there's conversion. So when we're thinking about channels, we're thinking about CTV, YouTube, podcast creators, influencers, all those hard to reach channels that are really high reach and high impact. Those are where you're doing those campaigns. You're telling a story, you're building ideas, you're building emotional connection, you're making people feel something. That's brand search lift, geo holdouts, MMM contribution, things like that are really valuable. Demand capture. You're finding people in the market and you're pulling them in. They know who you are. Now they're ready for you. How do you make them a part of who you are? That's meta prospecting, TikTok, programmatic display, things like that. Love to measure with incrementality, new customer revenue, view through lift, anything, any tools like that. And James is going to talk us through a lot of that stuff. So I'm really excited about it. But this is where creative needs to connect to your demand creation, where you're telling a story, but then you're actually showing how your product solves that problem. Your conversion campaigns are the easiest to measure because you know that they're there. The trap to get into with conversion campaigns is they may not be incremental. A lot of these conversions may have already happened if you didn't do anything at all. And so it's important to be running these tests here as well. That's where we're talking about branded search, retargeting, lower funnel social. That's ROAS, last click. It's fine here, but it could be better. The creative is usually an offer, a social proof, some level of urgency, limited time offers, sold out, things like that. So when you put it all together, what does this look like? We actually had the opportunity to run CTV geo holdout for a client of ours, Peak Design. And so CTV, exactly the situation that we were talking about, this channel probably would have been cut if it were not measured intelligently and well. We did matched holdout markets and saw that when we ran CTV for them, they saw foot traffic increases in their stores, 28% lift on the test markets to the -3% in their holdout markets. We did this over a 6-week period. It showed us that CTV really has a meaningful impact on their campaigns. And the key question was, can we drive in-store traffic with CTV? The answer was very much a yes, and has now become a key part of our program. This is what we mean by architecture. When we have these structured programs, these structured tests built into the system, it becomes really easy for us to actually start to understand what works, what doesn't work, and kind of go from there. So that's a key piece here. But honestly, I think the biggest piece now is how do we go from strategy to science? So I told you why it's important, how to do it, what's important about it. The next stage around this is, okay, well, how do we actually bring this into fruition? And with that, I'll give you over to James.
Thanks very much, Samir. That was a great introduction. So we're here to talk about how we actually get to the vision that Samir laid out there. How do we use testing and experimentation as a vehicle to arrive at the truth and make better investment decisions? At Work Magic, we believe in a triangulated approach. You guys may started to hear this term around the industry. What that really means is something you're probably all familiar with. All of the signals you collect are valuable to some degree, right? It's a matter of making an informed decision, balancing information you collect from different areas. And that's what Work Magic does. We're leveraging attribution modeling, we're leveraging media mix modeling, and it's all being calibrated by ground truth incrementality tests. So really, what is incrementality testing? Generally speaking, it's designed to tell you what the true value of the media is, what would happen if you didn't show the ads, how many sales would you have lost, or how many sales would you gain if you do show the ads. Generally speaking, incrementality today is often run in the form of a geotest. A geotest is going to use geographic-based sales data. It is agnostic and completely unaffected by cookie loss and other issues around tracking individual users. So around 4 or 5 years ago, geotesting became the preeminent way of measuring media due to things like iOS 14 and other evolutions in tracking. Generally, it involves running regression modeling. The more sophisticated, the better, but generally you're going to be running regression modeling to identify certain geos that are highly correlated with other geos, right? The idea is you're going to use what happens in some control geos to predict what would have happened in your treatment geos, right? And that counterfactual prediction is really what underlies it all. The most important component, though, is incorporating all of your sales data. Nowadays, consumers are quite fickle, and they're going to purchase a variety of different places. It really has nothing to do with where you want them to be, right? It is where they're going to be at the time they want to purchase. So sometimes that's in a retail shop. People still do go to malls these days, right? So that is sometimes where they are. Sometimes it's in TikTok, and they're in TikTok shops. Sometimes it's when they're purchasing baby diapers in Amazon, they add it to their cart there, right? So consumers have gotten quite disloyal to individual sales platforms these days. And that's why it's so important to capture the full effect, not just on your direct-to-consumer website, or not just on Amazon, or not just in retail. Wherever you distribute your product, you want to measure the effect of your media on those distribution channels. So we're going to just jump in a bit to the technical weeds here, just so you guys can explain, if anyone ever asks you, what is a geotest and how does it work? As I mentioned before, if you're using a software like WorkMagic, it's happening automatically. You're identifying a set of geos that can very highly accurately predict what happens in other geos, right? And so what you do is you use that to make a counterfactual prediction. That's a fancy word for what would have happened if we didn't introduce treatment. The most common form of treatment is pausing your ads in a certain set of geos, right? So with the counterfactual, what you're actually doing is saying, how many sales would I have gotten in Los Angeles or in New York or in this set of DMAs if I hadn't paused that media, right? How much would have happened? How do you know how much would have happened? You didn't pause the media in these other geos that you're using to predict, right? So the media stays active in the majority of the country, gets paused in a small part of it, and then you can make this counterfactual prediction. What you're actually looking for is your counterfactual, what would have happened, to diverge from what you see happen, right? And if you think there would have been more sales if you had kept the media live than you actually observe, that delta between the two, which is demonstrated in the difference between the pink and the blue line on the right side, that delta, that is the effect of the media. Those are sales you would have gotten if the media had been serving, right? Now, the downside is if the media has an effect, you're gonna lose some sales during the test as a means to learn that the media has an effect, which sounds rotten to a lot of people. Like, why do I have to lose sales just to prove that I'm getting sales from the media? Well, that's kind of what it takes, but a good geo design is gonna limit the business impact, right? So most of our tests at Measured are only run on 5 or 10% of the country. They're run for the absolute minimum time necessary to get a statistically significant result, because pausing your media when it has an effect is not a preferred way of testing if there were alternatives, but oftentimes it is the only way to test, right? So the idea is, how do you do that while minimizing the potential business effect and maximizing the learning you get? What do you get out of this? The true ROAS, not the platform reported one, not the Google Analytics reported one, the actual ROAS that you can take to finance and say, this is actually what the media is contributing, right? And you can do that everywhere your media can be geo-targeted. So this slide, I think, is a good demonstration of the differences and the blind spots you can have. And Samir was speaking to this as well. Nowadays, it is very hard to track. And when I say very hard, I mean it's hard for any software or pixel or cookie, not actual people, but the software. It's hard for the software to track individual people over a long period of time, right? 10 years ago, you could see a customer journey in Google Analytics that it would span 45 days and 30 different channels and touch points, and the wealth of data you would get there is enormous, and you can in your mind construct this big user journey that people go through on their way path to purchase, right? It's no longer the case these days. The journeys are just as long, if not longer, and certainly more complicated, I think. The tracking isn't what it used to be, right? And so the further from your purchase event the media is, like upper funnel media, CTV, YouTube, out of home, linear TV, display ads, things that are introducing your brand and building awareness, the longer they are from the purchase event, the less likely you are to capture the impact in something like last click or last touch reporting, right? And that's really going to cause kind of systemic blind spots, right? They're biased in certain parts of your media, which is the biggest risk. If everything was blind to the same degree, it would be fine. But not everything is. And the reporting you're going to see in the platform or in Google Analytics, the last touch reporting is always going to be favored towards channels closest to the purchase event by definition. And so what that means is anything you have that's further from the event is getting biased against in the last touch universe. And that's really what's happening. And when you run testing, you're going to uncover and surface the value of the media that can't be seen through last touch reporting, right? And that's why it's a great, like Samir was saying, last touch is a great tool when you're just on Facebook or maybe just in Google or just in Google and Facebook even, right? If you're just doing low funnel activity, you don't really need to worry about the bias to as large a degree, right? It's when you introduce other marketing, mid funnel, up funnel, things get much more complicated. That's when testing becomes the most important means of measuring.
Yeah, I'll add one more to that, James, even like offline, right? Like I think it's been a huge benefit for offline as well.
Yeah, offline sales measurement and then offline media as well. Basically, anytime. I mean, this is another great side that demonstrates this, right? The green lines here, guys, it's a very small subset of the marketing, but that's really, by and large, what can be tracked cleanly these days.
Yeah.
Right? So even within the Google universe, okay, Google has every means and every motivation to make YouTube look good, right? How often does YouTube look good in AdWords?
That's a very clear statement about the motivations behind some
Very
content.
bad. Sorry, guys.
Are you thinking about a particular...
YouTube often looks very bad in AdWords due to nothing else than Google's actually unable to track and attribute people over those journeys, right? So out of home, CTV, anything you're doing where people are not expected to click and reach your website immediately is an area that's probably being undervalued in your media plan, right? And so as your media plan expands, that's happening more and more often. You're going to see, I introduced some new channel. Why does it always look bad? Yeah. Sometimes it's not good, but more often than not, it looks bad because of the way we look at it, right? And that's what has to change. We talked a bit about at the top, this omni-channel measurement, and that the term we use to describe this is halo. And what that means is sales effect that's happening outside of the landing page you're sending people to or the D2C site you're promoting in the creative, right? So generally, the halo effect is going to be in Amazon, it's going to be in TikTok Shop, it could be in your offline retail stores, it could be in big box retail like Walmart or Target, right? These are all places where your marketing has an effect, although it might not be the intended place you're sending people to. What we have found at Work Magic is that this halo effect, whether it's Amazon or in-store, in real life shopping, the halo effect accounts for up to around a third of the lift from the media. I'll just repeat that. So if we were only measuring what happens on your direct-to-consumer site, you would be missing roughly a third of the effect of the media for the average brand that Work Magic works for, right? And so that is a huge gap. And it's actually going to be different in different channels, right? So one channel may drive 50% of the lift to D2C. The other channel might be 20%. So if you're not measuring that omni-channel effect, you're actually introducing other bias now because certain channels are going to drive more halo as a percent of their total than others, right? So like a channel you use that's really heavy in your D2C promo creative may not have that much halo on Amazon, right? Especially if your prices are better on your D2C site. Well, other creative that doesn't speak to any of the promos anywhere may be very different, right? And then you're going to see a different effect there. So even when we start measuring channel to channel to channel with different brands, the insights are very interesting, and you start to really understand that if anything is left unmeasured, there's probably some information gap in how you're making decisions. The last piece here we want to touch on is making the decision process easier, right? And AI's been the most popular thing to talk about for some time now in the media world as well. And I'm sure many of you guys have heard of agentic media buying, or agentic X, or agentic Y, or agentic Z, right? And I think from our perspective, we are building those things as well. But the most immediately applicable use of an agentic layer is interpreting and understanding where to put your budget and why. Right now, a media mix model is going to be looking across all your different channels, going to be analyzing dozens and dozens of saturation curves everywhere, right? And then it's going to tell you what to do. It's going to tell you to fund this, put this much budget here, put this much budget there, and you'd expect this return. It won't tell you why. It won't tell you that, like, under the hood, the reason is this channel's on the downward slope. You're about to fall off a cliff on the marginal return, and you should divest it. This other channel hit a stable point, and the returns are not improving, but they're stable, so you should put the money there, right? And that's what an AI bot can do. It can take these recommendations, which are very hard to parse the why on your own, and it can communicate them to you immediately in a very clean way. And what that does is give you confidence, right? Not just to take the instructions and deploy them without thinking, but to be able to explain why. So if someone asks you, why are we decreasing on Meta and increasing in CTV, or vice versa? Now you have an explanation, right? And that used to require a team of analysts to kind of review the outputs and figure out why it's recommending things and and how to explain it.
Yeah, I mean, these saturation analyses and MMMs are so valuable just from like a day-to-day standpoint. And I think one of the things that I would tell people is one of the mistakes that we see is people run an incrementality test or a saturation analysis, on month one and go, all right, I'm good for 12 months. And the reality of it is time changes, customers change, competitors change. And so these tests need to be done regularly and in kind of a framework and done consistently and revisited, because your creative changes, the market conditions change. And so there's only so much we can hold true at any given point. And so what I want people to take away is incrementality testing and this MMM and MTA are really important. Triangulation is key, but it's not a set it and forget it, done once and we're done. This is a muscle that needs to be consistently taken care of and managed appropriately.
Yeah, we would typically recommend brands test all their major marketing channels twice a year at minimum, upwards of 3 to 4 times a year. What you'll find is that incrementality is due to a lot of an incremental ROAS, or whatever metric you guys care about. It's due to a lot of factors: your brand, all the other marketing you're doing, the competition in the marketplace, the platform you're competing in, all the creative you're running, the promos on your website, the landing pages on your website, right? The repeat retention rates, like all of these things are going to change over time. It's not to say that you should be testing every single month the same thing over and over again. But there is a point at which your test needs to be refreshed and revisited, right? We would say definitely within 6 months, but oftentimes like once every 3 or 4 months is a good cadence. And when you run these tests with WorkMagic, they don't run for very long, right? Yeah. The business impact is minimized. They run for like 3 weeks. You get the result and you're done, and then you're off and optimizing, right? And that's the key: is that testing is not the end. It's the means to an end. It's the means to making better decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. All right, let's talk just ultimate stack, strategy plus measurement. You and me together, James. Let's give kind of a quick overview of people, what they can do to figure out where they are kind of in this mix. So we put together these 6 questions. I'll let you take the first few, and then I'll jump into the last 3. So just walk people through kind of the thinking here.
Yeah, so the first question to ask is, are you measuring top of funnel with last click ROAS, or are you using incrementality testing like we had reviewed today, right? I think this was a major theme that we touched on today, which is that the further from the purchase event, the less useful that last click ROAS is going to be. And so if that's the vehicle you're using to measure the effect of media, as you expand beyond the very bottom of the funnel, it becomes less and less sufficient. Right. And really what that means is you're either overspending or underspending in every channel, right? And you want to eventually hit your ideal or somewhere closer to your ideal. The second question to consider is, when did you last run a controlled holdout test? As we just talked about, generally, if you haven't tested a major channel in the last 6 months, you may be off the mark, right? You may be either, like I said, under or over invested to some significant degree. That's leaving sales on the table. When we talk about inefficiency, what it really means is leaving sales on the table that you could have acquired for your business, right? And we want to make that as limited an issue as possible. Frequently testing the major stuff is the number one thing to make sure you're making wise, informed investment decisions. And then the third question here is, do you know your blended MER, your contribution margin, your new customer rate, these key metrics that allow you to speak confidently in the room with finance? Right? And that's really, I think, the dream state for marketer and marketer orgs is to speak like finance, but with a marketing lens, right? And that's really important. And I think, finance has always been skeptical of what we in the marketing side bring to bat because attribution is biased and not true, to be honest. And so that's generally seen as like, well, that sounds nice. Of course you think it's worth this much type of thing, right? Well, incrementality strips that all out.
Yeah.
And once you start running tests and you start referring to test results, then you can ladder up to financial metrics really confidently. And when they give you the financial goals, you can define your media metrics with confidence, and you can actually have a fluid conversation back and forth.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The CFO finance conversation is so interesting because what we've noticed is earlier brands tend to have less experienced financial officers, so they're less comfortable with the gray that is marketing. They need things to reconcile, like on a P&L. But we've realized, like, the larger the business, the more comfortable they become with the fact that P&Ls almost never actually reconcile. They're always off by like some amount. And they start to see that that's also how marketing works as well. And so it's really interesting to kind of see that. On the strategy side for us, the key one is, does every channel have a defined role? Not just a budget, but truly a defined role. And the way Query does it is we do it broken out by awareness, consideration, conversion, because we want to know, what is the expectation of that? Are we trying to build brand positioning and brand reach? Are we trying to get you to compare our product against the competitive set and what the features and benefits are? Or are we ultimately trying to actually get you to purchase? Because everything has a different goal attached to it and has a different tool then, right? Accordingly, your creative needs to change. Your product messaging won't build brand emotional resonance the same way an awareness creative will. And so really thinking about that and how those fit together is really key. And then one of my favorite ones is, if I asked you to stop all your top of funnel spend tomorrow, would you know what the impact would be? Do you have a sense of what would happen to your business in the next 30 days? Would it stay flat? Would you start to recover? Would you start to lose momentum? How long would it take? Those are the questions that you really want to know, especially because the more clarity you have around the delay in your media's impact on things, the better you have an understanding of how long it takes you to learn as well. And so having a really clear understanding around these things is really important. If you're kind of going through here and saying, hey, I actually don't know a lot of this, then this is where we got to really think around your media strategy plans and then measurement. And I highly recommend kind of reaching out to either of us, and we can walk you through it and help you think about how to turn your paid media into a true system and an architecture versus something that's very reactive in terms of trying to hit expectations versus being able to say proactively, this is what my media can do for my business. James, I'm going to bump us into our Q&A, and I'll open the floor to, if anybody has any questions, throw it in the public chat. But I'm going to start with one or two while we wait and see if anyone isn't shy. But one of my biggest questions for you, James, is we know that there's a business impact to incrementality testing. How do you define what channels to start with first? How do you think about that? Because and what channels are not worth testing then, right? Because if everything has an impact, how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, generally, we would start with measuring your major investments, right? So usually that's Meta, Google, or some subset of those. Why? because where you're spending the most amount of money is often the most important place to validate right off the bat. Right. So basically, I would approach it like number one is efficiency. Are you spending more or less than you should on your major investments? That's only going to get you a handful of tests right away, right? But then from there, the next question I'd ask is like, are there places that you're underinvested on?
Yeah.
Places that might look particularly strong from a media mix model perspective that you are not spending very much on, right? Now, a media mix model is not going to give you the truth always, but it's not going to say things are great unless there's some signal. Right. And so if it doesn't think something is at all worth it, then, that's maybe not something to lean into. But if you get some signal that this is working, that's what you want to test. You want to test to validate the stuff that's spending a lot, make sure your efficiency is in line there. Then you want to look at the stuff that might be underfunded, stuff that oftentimes it's Pinterest or Snapchat or TikTok or some of these other social networks or channels that have some investment, but the brands were not able to validate that it's really working.
Yeah.
Right. That's where I would go next. And then the last place people look is like new channels. Have there been a roster of things you were interested in testing, but you didn't want to lean into nationally to the degree it might be required. And number two, you didn't want to do so until you knew it was working.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would be the three things.
That's really fascinating. It's interesting because it's, I think a lot of people think about geotesting as like, I have to advertise nationally and I have a holdout in a small subset, but you can do the alternative too. You can advertise in the small subset and hold out nationally and see what the impact is.
That's the brand's most popular way of testing new channels, and that is, I would say that's like 10 or 20% of geotests are run that way. They're more often used for new channels. Brands can spend into 10% of the country before they go national, and they can do it in a very cost-conscious way, conservative way from a budgeting perspective, which is like very appealing to marketers, right? Everyone wants to test new things. No one wants to sign up for destroying their ROI in the process. Geo provides a really good solution for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like we don't have a lot of questions today, but I'll ask you my one last question is, incrementality testing, we talked about it as moment in time. How do you guys recommend, media buyers then turn that into day-to-day signal? From our end, we tend to say, okay, great, we got an incrementality test. We apply that as an average against what the MTA says and say, okay, great, if MTA is here, MMM is here, and incrementality is here, the truth is somewhere kind of in the middle. And we apply that to our day-to-day optimizations and forecasting. Is that how you guys think about it? Is that what you would recommend your media buyers do?
Yeah, I think that's a fair approach when you have different systems running in different places. So you have MTA running over here and you have some testing you're doing over there, and you need to manually bring them together. In which case, I think that kind of framework. Another common framework would be, if some brands might believe the geotest entirely, and then they'll use that to do a multiplier on the attribution. So that's another common way. The way we do it at WorkMagic, I think, is much better. So we have attribution modeling and media mix modeling as part of our ecosystem here. And when we run a lift test, those lift tests are used to calibrate our two models. And therefore, those two models will reflect the lift test moving forward. And then you get, attribution for day-to-day reporting. So you know what happened yesterday all the way down to the creative, all the way up to the channel. You get media mix modeling for forecasting what will happen next week, next month, next quarter. Same thing, channel tactic. And so you get these models that get calibrated by these tests. So you don't have to be doing this one-time mental exercise. The other issue with doing it in that framework, which again, it's better than not doing it at all, right? Yep. And so I don't want to make it sound like it's a bad way of doing things. In marketing and measurement, it's always just best available, right? If you're doing better than you did yesterday, you're doing a good job. And so I think none of it's bad, I think. But generally, we would say that approach kind of has the same snapshot in time problem that you were referencing. Yeah. And when you do that, your geotest is really useful when it completes, and then every kind of day afterwards, its relevancy is diminishing a little, but you kind of anchor to that in your decision making.
You're assuming nothing else is changing, and you're creating a false assumption.
So that's why we would recommend brands work with companies like WorkMagic, where that snapshot in time is actually used to calibrate models that get updated every day moving forward, right? And so what that means is that snapshot in time does determine by and large what you're going to see in these other models, but that's not the only thing that goes in. There's going to be other tests that come in the future, right? And that might change your opinion. I'll give you an example. If you run a meta test and you now think it's very different than what you thought before, there's a good chance other things have changed as well.
Seasonality is one of the biggest ones. People always cap seasonality.
Like your other media might have gotten better or worse, right? And so when, there's only 100% of sales to go around. So like, if something's going to come in and drive 50% when you thought it was 20%, well, that delta is coming out of somewhere. Maybe it's, I didn't actually drive as much baseline organic sales as I thought, or maybe Google wasn't doing as well as I thought, right? And so that's why I like testing to calibrate models in a single ecosystem is really where a lot of brands are moving towards, whether it's with WorkMagic or another solution out there. And the measurement ecosystem is moving in this direction as well for that reason.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We do have one question that came through, so I'd love to kind of close on that. So what was the most interesting test you've seen in your career, James?
Oh, wow. Most interesting test I've seen in my career. Yeah. I would probably say, it wasn't so much a test, but it used the same geo-based measurement approach, and it smells and looks like a geo-test in many ways. We had some brands that were opening their own and operated retail stores.
Oh, interesting.
In some very prominent shopping streets in like Abbot Kinney in Venice and like some streets in New York. And it was mostly like a branding play. It's expensive to open those retail stores. And what they wanted to see, there was lift in their other sales channels, right? Did opening a retail location actually drive more people to shop in other retail locations, but also on their own operated D2C website, in Amazon, in TikTok Shop? Was there like this rising tide lifts all boats effect to opening a store in a highly trafficked area? And the answer is absolutely, there was. Actually, the lift was quite significant. Now, it was geographically limited because that store was only on the street and like it wasn't, a TV ad blasted to 300 million Americans. So it was like limited in its scope. But what that brand was able to do is take that lift and say, okay, now I can actually bake that ROAS in to budgeting future retail shops, right? It doesn't cost actually what I thought it cost. It costs that amount minus what I'm going to make from incremental sales and profit, right? And that was a really powerful, interesting learning. Everyone has kind of theorized that doing this like in real life activations, whether it's at an event or a retail store you open or whatever it might be, that those have a wider effect. Everyone's always theorized about this. And what we've now started to see is that the theory is true. Yeah. Again, if limited in scope, but like, if you imagine you open 50 retail shops, that's a very different story in terms of scope.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like you say it really well. Everyone assume like we have this context around there is this halo and things, and it's really just saying, okay, how do I actually measure that so I can make smart financial decisions? It's interesting. My favorite test that we ever ran was we had a client of ours that wanted to invest in a large brand campaign, right? Brand campaigns are expensive. They are big bets, right? And the creative agency had brought two concepts. And the idea, the CMO at the time was saying, all right, I don't want to be the person who just willy-nilly chooses a concept, right? How many times do CMOs just get put concepts in front of them and they've got to subjectively make a decision? And his perspective was, I think we can do this a little bit more objectively. So we actually ran 2 geo holdout tests for them where we ran small geography, one concept, small geography, other concept, and then a holdout on the national, and compared the 3. And then the concept that won is what got rolled out as the brand campaign. And so, again, not perfect proof because obviously by the time the campaign had changed, the market had changed, but gave them at least some understanding and some perspective on where to go next and what to do. And it was really exciting to kind of see that come to life and let them feel a little better about the 10-figure investment that they were about to make. So, James, I'm so excited that we had this opportunity to do this. Thank you again so much for joining us. If anybody wants to learn more about WorkMagic, please check them out. We at Cree are big fans of theirs. They are a big piece of our measurement frameworking, and we help our clients really graduate into them as much as possible. And if you have any questions on media, please check us out at weareqry.com. Happy to help wherever we can.